An Asian American Reckoning with Cathy Park Hong. My name is Pam Sari. I'm using a she, her, hers, Ibu pronoun, and I direct the Asian American and Asian Resource and Cultural Center at Purdue University. First, I would like to thank our collaborators of this event, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign Cultural Center. Thank you so much, Christina Carpio, Jackie Yee, and also David Che. Indiana University Asian Culture Center. Thank you so much, Melanie Cullather, Sarah Stamey, and also Kevin Tahura. Special thanks for co-sponsors for today, the Asian American Studies Program and the Center for Research on Race and Ethnicity in Society at Indiana University. So our three cultural centers, Purdue, IU, and U of I, are connected through the Great Lakes Asian American Student Services, or GLASS. We are a regional network of university units and staff, faculty in the Great Lakes area that work in the Asian American and multicultural student affairs and services. So it includes Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, and Minnesota. For the past 3 weeks, our three centers have been coming together and discussing Cathy Park Hong's book, Minor Feelings. So the hope is that today's discussion will allow us to have a truly special time in bringing back some of the questions and some of the conversations that we had this time with our special guest, Cathy Park Hong. So Cathy, thank you so much for being here with us. And some information about today's schedule. The first part of this event will be Cathy's conversation with Dr. Dina Okamoto. Professor Okamoto is a class of 1948 Herman B. Wells Professor and Director of the Center for Research on Race and Ethnicity in Society, or CRRES, at Indiana University. So if you have questions during this time, please put them on the chat and we will read them during the questions from audience time. Again, please put your questions on the chat. And if you would like to ask your question anonymously, you can send them privately through chat to me or my colleagues, Melanie and Christina. So Pam Sari, Melanie Cullather, and Christina Carpio on the chat. In your email confirmation, you should have received the link for our event evaluation. The evaluation is important to us, so please take the time at the end of the event to fill out the form. It will only take you less than a minute. And also, please include your suggestion for our next book reading. We would appreciate that. Today's event will be recorded and live captioned. If you need the live captioning, please click on those three dots, and then it will tell you show subtitle, and you can benefit from that, or closed caption button if that's what you see. We got so much help to prepare for this event, so I would like to thank Terry Wood for providing us with our live captioning today. Manabu Takatani is at the technology. Thank you so much, Manabu. Thank you also to PJ Mark, Cathy's agent, for the help that you provide. And to introduce Cathy Park Hong is Dr. Jennifer Lee, an Associate Professor of Sociology and the Interim Director of the Asian American Studies Program at Indiana University. Everyone, please welcome Professor Jennifer Lee.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone to be here. I'm really excited and looking forward to this event. I'm very delighted to have the honor of introducing Cathy Park Hong. It truly is a special opportunity to have her here with us today to discuss her book, Minor Feelings. Cathy Park Hong is an award-winning poet, author, and full professor at Rutgers University. As with all formal introductions of honored guest speakers, I must first mention her numerous accolades, including the Barnard Women Poets Prize, the Wyndham Campbell Literature Prize, and prestigious fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts. But I would also like to take this moment to speak on a personal note. For lack of a more sophisticated way of saying this, I loved this book. I had set aside a couple weeks to read it, but I ended up devouring it in a single day. It resonated with me like few other books have. In her book, Cathy Park Hong hesitates to use a universal we when writing about her experiences, but as I read it, I found both comfort and discomfort in feeling like she was writing what is in my head. She evoked memories of my own childhood, of my own grandmother obsessed with a TV show in a language she couldn't understand, of my passion for Sanrio erasers and mechanical pencils. I could almost smell them as I read her words, and of my own envy of my friends' families when asked to stay for dinner. And she beautifully wrote the words and ideas that I have never been able to fully formulate. How I look sideways, but not back at childhood. How the model minority image of Asian family values gaslights my reality. How I also, quote, treat good fortune not as a gift, but a loan. And from what I read and heard, her book is resonating in similar ways for many others. So while I know that Minor Feelings does not describe a universal we, I do believe that this important book is a must read for anyone wanting to better understand part of the contemporary Asian American experience. So thank you and welcome, Cathy.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm Dina Okamoto, and Cathy and I will be in conversation for about the next 20 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to questions for folks. But we'd love for anyone who has questions, to put them in the chat as we're talking, and then I'll call on Pam at that 20-minute mark, and Cathy will take those questions as well. Okay. So Cathy, I just want to say that I'll do a little introduction, and of course, if you want to say anything to our audience, please feel free. I want to really echo what Jennifer has said. This book has been transformative for me. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here today, to be in conversation with you about your work as a writer, as a poet, as an Asian American, as someone who writes and thinks about race and immigration in America. We're here today to talk about your book, Minor Feelings, this amazing essay collection, which really is so needed in this moment. There's so much to unpack, and it's a book that I really can read again and again. And I really appreciate your candor, your humor, your rage, and that you shared your personal life and your inner thoughts with us. And again, it's been really transformative to read. I think most of all because, like Jennifer, I feel seen. There's recognition and relatability here. And from the student discussions that we've had over the past several weeks, students feel seen as well. And so I think this is just, we're all so excited that you're here. So I guess I can start out with a couple of questions. And then if it makes sense, you can read from passages of your book. We kind of had left it open when we communicated about this before. And so I guess I'll just start. And then, Cathy, of course, if you want to say anything else, please do. I'll start by saying too, welcome back in some ways to the Midwest. I was born and raised in Southern California. I lived in New York for a couple of years. I moved to the Midwest and people thought I was crazy. But the Midwest has something interesting and special here. And I think talking about race is also something that I'm sure will come up today. But in any case, one of the first questions I had for you, your book was published in late February, right before COVID hit, before the murder of George Floyd, before COVID was termed the China virus, right? And in so many ways, it could not be a better time for a book about race and a book about Asian Americans. And you've written about race before. So I guess one question I had was, why did you want to write a book of essays about race and racial identity at this moment for you? And again, this moment was not last year, right? It takes years to write a book. But when you began to think about it, why were the last few years the moment for you that you wanted to write about this?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I just want to first say thank you to both of you for your really generous and really moving introductions. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for reading my book, Minor Feelings. To answer your thoughtful question about minor feelings, why I chose to focus on racial identity, I think, like, first of all, as a poet, I've always been interested in race. I would say that, like, my first book of poems that was published when I was, in my 20s, is very much about my Korean identity, and then I just went kind of on a weird speculative route. But it was always, that was always in my mind. That was always one of my obsessions. And people have said, oh, this book is very timely, and it came out at the right time. And, with what's going on with the rise of white supremacist fascism and George Floyd's murder and the anti-Chinese anti-Asian racism that was happening, and that was at its peak last spring. But I have to say that, like, when I actually really actively started writing this book, which was around, I would say, 2015, this was all brewing, this was all happening, and I was just, I just had my antennas out and just kind of absorbing and working on absorbing and responding and thinking about just the political turmoil that we were in. I mean, if I'm sure all of you know that Eric Garner, Black Lives Matter really took off in 2014. Trump was elected in 2016. And, especially since 2016, it's been one racial crisis after another, with Black Lives Matter, police brutality, undocumented migrants, Muslim, the threat of the Muslim ban. I mean, it was just dire all throughout, but I guess it's just been getting more and more dire. And so I just wrote that book during that time period. I felt this urgency, especially after Trump got elected, to open up the book. I think when I first started writing this book, it was a little bit narrower in scope. It was more about institutional racism in literature, in the art world. It was maybe a little bit more like in the realm of critical theory, so therefore a little bit more academic. But then I think after Trump got elected, I was like, this has to reach a broader audience. And in that way, weirdly, my reason to make it, my solution to make it broader was actually focusing even more on the Asian American identity, and also making it much more personal, much more personal. I mean, a lot of things happened. I also became a mother in 2014. And I think that also changed the way I wrote. I think I was also just a lot more seemed at stake for my writing. And in terms of, like, the anti-Asian racism, yes, there was an explosion of that, where Asian Americans were targets in a way that East Asian, I'm talking about, were targets in a way that it was unusual before. But, I'm also someone who's very well aware of, who have had experienced not just microaggressions, but also aggressive aggressions from when I was little. I mean, that also has existed. Let us not forget that this is not, the anti-Asian racism was unprecedented in the spring. It was racism that I faced in childhood And then I guess like when I was old, you know, or even as an adult, and some of it was microaggressions, some of it was structural. And I guess I haven't, you know, there's been a lot of really incredible, brilliant poetry and fiction, and also a lot of just academic, scholarly works that I'm indebted to. But I just felt like there wasn't just this clear kind of a straightforward book of essays on kind of the interior thoughts, the interior consciousness of the Asian American condition. And I thought I needed to write it. I needed to write what I wanted to read that I was not seeing anywhere else.
And I think that's right. I mean, I think, you know, my work, many of us study Asian Americans. We see and we read anything that we can. And I think there hasn't been anything like this book in quite a while that really unpacks the experience in ways that, again, there are layers upon layers in your book of examples from personal experiences that you've had to your kind of thoughts and ideas, right? Bringing in history, social commentary. I think that makes it so rich. And of course, I have to ask this question, and I know you get asked this probably every interview you do, but about, you know, you write about the indignity of being Asian and being Asian American. You write about, right, the title of your book, Minor Feelings. And again, I think this idea is not quite anything that anyone has been able to talk about clearly. And I think what's interesting about the concept is that Asian Americans are racialized and stereotyped as submissive, without emotion. Yet this book is all about emotionality, right? Shame, rage, and these minor feelings. And so can you talk a little bit about this concept of minor feelings, how you developed it? Because I think, again, it's so central, but it's throughout the book that we can see it, and I think we can see it in our own everyday experiences. So I'd love to hear you talk about it for a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I think it's so funny. It's like, you know, there's this persistent stereotype of Asians, especially Asian American women, as quiet and submissive, and it's like always hovered over me. And it's it clashes so sharply with the way I grew up, because the women I grew up with, Korean women, like my mother and my aunts and, you know, my friends, were the opposite of that. They were really strong, first of all, and really opinionated and direct and funny and sharp and maybe crazy. And, and so it's just weird, you know, that there's always been this contradiction. And, you know, and I guess that's also the conflict, right? Like is just always being gaslit, or just no matter, or just like having this reality imposed upon your own reality that makes no sense, you know, that sort of, and feeling and having, you know, these residual feelings of, you know, rage or confusion or insecurity or whatever. I mean, that's minor feelings. But a lot of it is also, you know, based on actually this kind of Korean emotional condition, which actually really resonated with me. I thought that was much closer to the way my family is than any kind of American sort of you know, national, this kind of national spirit of optimism or anything like that. And it's the word Han, you know, and Han is this mixture of melancholy, wistfulness, despair, hopelessness, not hopelessness. There's always a little bit of hope. You know, probably like the way all Americans are feeling right now. Bitterness is also key. It's a national emotion that South Koreans feel because of their history, because of the fact that they have been colonized so often throughout history, particularly by the Japanese, and there was this huge war that split them in half, and they had a string of dictatorships, and that there was this, they had to kind of deal. It was just one long history of defeat, and because of that, there's this kind of sense of just this persistent rage and melancholy because there's this sort of structural oppression that just never, that's never, that they can't get away from, that they can't actually break from. And I was thinking why, and I was thinking about Han, and I was thinking, well, why isn't it not, how come, I don't think this is particular to Koreans. I think this is actually, this can also expand to the way America really is, and the way the US has, used the sort of the American dream and the sort of, enforced optimism to hide the real kind of structural inequities that's getting worse and worse because of neoliberalism and, anti-Black racism and, the foundations of slavery and all of that. And I was like, I have to say there are parallels between what's happening, what Koreans grew up with, and just race in America. So that's a lot of that was a lot of that informed my ideas and minor feelings, is the sense that, like, this kind of sense of feeling stuck or feeling fixed in one place instead of an American narrative where the individual overcomes, and the individual through like empowerment is able to kind of build their strength and become, and get through any kind of adversity, which has always been sort of the American myth. And in fact, as we're learning, it's a farce. It's a farce, and we're seeing that not now, how much of a farce it is. And I'm not saying that we should despair because of that, but I think it's also empowering in a way to acknowledge that and to be aware of that. And I think and it's not just among Black Americans who have written about it, made art about it, and pushed for policy with the knowledge of that reality. I think it's the same for Asian Americans who have been constantly gaslit by the model minority myth, and used as an example that they are the minorities who can live the American dream. So why can't all these other minorities follow suit? And there's a different kind of exceptionalism placed on us. And we haven't disrupted it as much as we should, or even when we do, this white supremacist country ignores us, and so this book is, it's my experience, but it's also a plea, for Asian Americans to try as much as they can to fight past this invisibility and this kind of this barrier, and go public with their own experiences and their own structural inequities, and be an ally. Because one of the questions that I ask is like, one of the questions that I want people to ask when they're think about when they're reading the book is like, so much of the Asian American experience is belonging, of always wanting to belong. And I want, and the question is, what America, what kind of America do you want to belong to? It's not just a question of belonging, but like, which America do you want to belong to? Do you want to belong to like Trump's America? Do you want to belong to like Goldman Sachs America? Or do you want to like belong to an America where with these other people of color, BIPOC, who are trying to fight for equity, and that's something you have to think about as an Asian American, any Asian American.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I really love that you break apart the model minority trope in so many different ways, right? Talking about your own experience and the experiences of others, that are in your orbit. You know, I love the part about stand-up comedy, right? Your friendships at Oberlin, and even the life and the death of Teresa Hak Kyung Cha. And so just by sharing those things and talking about Koreatown, right, the experiences of people that you knew there, people that had failed businesses, right? Those things are all breaking apart this model minority trope, which is so important. And then thinking about what you're saying about, you know, Asian Americans, I guess two things come up for me. One is about, you know, you are writing about your experience as Korean American, as an immigrant, as an English language learner, as a college student, a professional writer. It's a specific history, but again, the title of your book is about an Asian American reckoning. And so of course, this is begging the question about an Asian American consciousness and identity. And then I think I'm going to link that to another question that I have, but I think it's related. The fact that you talk about your Kochiyama and the radical past of the Asian American movement, right? And the coalitions that Asian Americans built with African Americans and other racialized communities, right? Native Americans, indigenous folks. Some people don't know anything about that history. And we barely see, we see glimmers of it today. But I guess one thing is I wanted to ask you, you know, what you think about an Asian American consciousness, and also why it was important for you to include that history in the book.
I think I included it precisely because of what you said, because very few people know about it. I think if you took like an Asian American studies class in college or an ethnic studies class, maybe that knowledge is pretty basic, but you know, I would say I'm a pretty well-read person, and I didn't even learn about Yuri Kochiyama until later in life, like until I was older. And it's that information is so obscure. Very few people even know about like Chinese American history, and or that the first Asian Americans who came here were Filipino immigrants, and or that like, or what happened afterwards in the Japanese internment camps. I mean, that is still very esoteric information. I mean, I think, so I thought that it was really important to have that in my book, especially the, I think especially the biographical material of Yuri Kochiyama, because it's an activist history that we really, really need to read about and understand and amplify. And I think she's a great model for us, especially today. I mean, if we're thinking about timeliness, I can't think of anyone more timely than Yuri Kochiyama in terms of her, the way, just her passion and her you know, how much she organized and how much she was so intersectional, you know, in Kochiyama. Maybe someone can spell that for you. Someone just asked Yuri, what's your last name? And also, yeah, that she's like, her generosity was not also, I think what also struck me about Yuri Kochiyama is that, you know, sometimes I think this is because of social media, we, you know, identities are so siloed, you know, like if you're Muslim, you care about Muslim rights, or you're Asian, you know, East Asian, you care about East Asian rights or whatever. And what I found remarkable about Kochiyama was that she was, you know, her rage and her need to, her activism was like intraracial and international. And I thought that was just so, you know, she was looking ahead there. She was thinking, she was anti-colonial, you know, she was talking about decolonization, and she was, you know, a really huge anti-racist, and was an ally to Malcolm X, and but was also for Puerto Rican rights. And so she's, I don't know, I found her strength to be dazzling. In Asian American consciousness, what I wanted to do, it's funny, I've heard like a couple criticisms about the book where they were like, well, she doesn't tell you what Asian American consciousness is or what the Asian American experience is. And I don't understand why she writes so much about the white experience or the Black experience, or how Asian Americans compare to the white experience or the Black experience. Why doesn't she tell you I don't understand why she just didn't tell us what the Asian American experience is. And I was like, I mean, I'll tell you my own experience, but I'm not going to give you a broad prescriptive definition of what Asian American is. I mean, that's the reason why I wrote it in this sort of kind of modular way, where it's a little bit of my life, it's a little bit of Asian American history, it's a little bit of what I was inspired by, which is not just Asian American history. And I think that like what Asian American is, and I think this is just also what race is in America, is that it's an analogy. You are, Koreans in Korea don't consider themselves Asian American. It's like, it's who you are against whiteness or who you are against Blackness. And actually that has to be acknowledged, because Asians, there are not enough discourse so far where Asian Americans really interrogate how whiteness has affected our consciousness, and how we have to decolonize ourselves from whiteness, and how our interest in capitalism has so much to do with whiteness, and so our aspirations have to do with whiteness. So I don't see how you cannot talk about being Asian American without talking about whiteness, or without talking about Blackness, because we are used so often as a wedge between the two poles. But not only that, I also want to kind of offer an invitation. This book is an invitation. I'm like, here's my story, but I want other people to kind of join, continue the conversation and write their own experiences. Like, I could not write about the Cambodian American experience. I can't write about the trans experience, trans Asian American experience. I can't write about, the Chinese American male experience. I mean, it's more about just sort of opening up the space, opening it up so other people can come in and be like, well, this is what my experience is. And then maybe there, a kind of Asian American consciousness can coalesce somehow. And I also want to say that there's already been that, I too am just continuing on the conversation too. It's not like I'm, creating this out of thin air.
Well, I have about 20 more questions, but I'm going to leave. I'm going to see if other people have any questions, and you can put it in the chat, and then Pam will read them for us. And if there aren't any, I'm happy to continue asking the questions that I have.
Dina, we have one question.
All right, go ahead.
Yes. So related to what you just said, can you explain a little bit more about your idea of speaking nearby Asian American experiences? I'm really interested in especially page 102 to 104 of your book related to speaking nearby and bad English. Can you expand a little bit more about that and possibly read some passages?
Sure. I guess I could read, maybe I'll read a passage of speaking nearby, and then I could expand upon it. In pages 102 to 103, I quote Trinity Minha, who is an amazing filmmaker and critic, where she's the one who coined the term And what she says is, when you decide to speak nearby rather than speak about, the first thing you need to do is acknowledge the possible gap between you and those who populate your film. In other words, to leave the space of representation open so that although you're close to your subject, you're always committed to not speaking on their behalf, in their place, or on top of them. So this, what she's talking about, this, what I'm talking about here is just, you know, the hot button issue, I guess, of cultural appropriation, or about how, you know, there's been so much heated debate about whether you're allowed or not to write about the other person's experience, or make films about the other person's experience when that person doesn't share your own experience. And so part of the essay is about that. And I thought, like, Trinity Minha's quote about speaking nearby was really, really helpful in sort of kind of like thinking about this idea differently, rather than like, oh, you're not speaking about that group, you're speaking nearby that group. But I also think that it's not also just, you know, me, like, say, my desire to write about the Black experience, or my desire to write about, like, you know, the Latinx experience. It's also, there is also, it's also challenging to write about my own experience, about my own Asian American experience, because there's been so much outside, there's been so many, like, myths or lies about Asian Americans that have been imposed upon me, that has been imposed upon us, that it's hard to find the truth of your own experience too. So here I read another part. So I'll just read the next section where I expand on it. I turn to the modular essay because I am only capable of speaking nearby the Asian American condition, which is so involuted that I can't stretch myself across it. The more I try to pin it, the more it escapes my grasp. I try to write about it as a lyric poem, but the lyric to me is a stage, a pedestal from which I throw my voice to point out what I'm not. The curse of anyone non-white is that you are so busy arguing what you're not that you never arrive at what you are. I admit that I sometimes still find the subject Asian America to be so shamefully tepid that I'm eager to change it, which is why I have chosen this episodic form with its exit routes that permit me to stray. But I always return from a different angle, which is my own way of inching closer to it. If I'm going to write nearby my Asian American condition, however, I feel combined to write nearby other racial experiences. Students have asked me, how do I write about racial identity without always reacting to whiteness? The automatic answer is tell your story. But this too can be a reaction to whiteness, since white publishers want the Muslim experience or the Black experience. They want ethnicity to be siloed because it's easier to understand, easier to brand. Ever since I started writing, I was not interested in telling my story, but also in finding a form, a way of speech that decentered whiteness. I settled on bad English because, as artist Greg Bordowitz said about radical art, it bypasses social media algorithms and consumer demographics by bringing together groups who wouldn't normally be in the room together. So I think this is just like from, you know, when I was younger, there was less this kind of intense debate about who had the right to write about their identity. You know, I think it was more, maybe you could say there was a naive belief in multiculturalism, that you can, of cultural bartering and, you know, among non-whites, you know, and, you know, whilst I would say that some of it is naive, I think that, you know, I still am, as an artist, as a writer, I still think it's important to have that cross-cultural influence. But rather than talking about whether or not you can do it or not, you know, whether you have the permission to do it or not, the question should be, it should be like, how do you do it? How do you do it ethically, and how do you do it responsibly? This is where I go back to writing nearby or speaking nearby, which is what Trinity Minha says, which is what she's trying to say is that you, by acknowledging the distance between you and your subject, you're showing that your knowledge of that subject is not total, that it's partial. And that it is, and that there, and you are acknowledging that you, who you are, and what your position is, you know, whether you're, you know, you're part of that group who might have colonized that group, or what, you know, or you grew up in the same street or something. But there is that kind of acknowledgement and tending to that acknowledgement that I think can help with a lot of the misunderstanding and stereotypes that we see a lot. And there's a lot of this kind of claiming and ownership that people talk about. I also quote another writer, Jess Rao, who says that, you know, he talks about how, what's this say? He says, it's his book, White Flights, and America's great and possibly catastrophic failure is its failure to imagine what it means to live together. And, you know, this chapter is more about narratives in, you know, stories and films and so forth. But I mean, novels and films and so forth. But, you know, I think for so long, the American narrative has been segregated, you know, where, and it's been dominated by the white imagination that was only about the white imagination. Whereas everything, all non-white narratives have been completely erased. So we don't even have, not only do we not know how to live together in an equitable way in reality, but we don't have a, you know, we don't have as much of a blueprint for it in the artistic imagination, in the fictional imagination. Certainly they exist. I'm not saying they don't. But, and I just think there's not enough. And I wonder if this kind of stay in your lane politics is really helpful towards imagining, having this sort of this kind of envisioning of what it really means to live together. Because we don't live in, that's not, because we don't actually live in these like isolated ethnic neighborhoods, you know, at least I don't, at least in cities, you know. Yeah.
Thank you. Dina, there's one more question, if I may.
Sure.
In the book, Cathy, you unpack the institutionalized racisms of academia and the broader field of writing. And in your discussion today, you invited us to question the notion of belonging, particularly what kind of America that Asian Americans want to belong to. Thinking about writing and belonging together, then, what kind of America do you hope this book to speaking to or intervening in? And what are the constraints and possibilities of finding and or challenging belonging as the book continues to find wider audiences?
Ooh, that's a very good question, the big question. The first question, you were saying that what belonging does it hope to speak to? And the other verb was contest, you said? Or I think I missed the...
Right. What are the constraints and possibilities of finding and challenging belonging as the book continues to find wider audience?
I think belonging is very important, as long as it's belonging where to a community where you finally feel, I mean, a lot of people have said this about my book, which I feel so grateful for, which is that they feel seen. You know, I've heard that repeatedly, and I've been very moved each time I've heard that. And I think first of all, what's very important is not to find that community that you aspire to be in a material way, like, you know, like I aspire to be in this this hipster community, or this community that has more status. That's not based on status per se, but perhaps a community where you feel seen, you know. And it doesn't necessarily have to be other Asian Americans. It could be like a gamer society, I don't know, but like, or it could be another race, or it could be a queer community, you know, just any community where you finally feel seen and you finally feel understood. But and I think, and I do believe in the importance in finding belonging there, because there, once you know that the afflictions that you have inside it's very important to know that you're not alone, that it's not this freak pathology that's only yours, but that it's felt by other people. And that because once you realize that, then you understand that it's a problem that's not your problem. It's a problem. It's their problem. It's a problem that it's not you being a freak. It's like, this is a problem that needs to be addressed. And that's what brings, that needs to be addressed. That's an outside problem. So that kind of belonging is very, very important. But I get, and I think Sarah Ahmed talks about this, like, it shouldn't stop at belonging. That's just the beginning. So the first step is finding good belonging in a community where you feel seen. But then perhaps, and Sarah Ahmed talks about this, nothing will get done if you just say, okay, I found my community, I have belonging, and that's that. I think it's more about, okay, now how do we interrogate and try to dismantle or fight or undermine this sort of structural, capitalist, racist, sexist, whatever-ist system that made me not belong in the first place. That made me not belong in the first place. So that's, and then so I believe in that. I think belonging is necessary to find strength, and to find strength in the struggle towards equity, that in a society where only a certain kind of person can belong, which is someone who is either cis, white, straight, wealthy, so I hope that answers your question.
We have a couple of more questions, and I'll read them to you. One is, refers to your chapter on indebtedness. It says, we often talk about the importance and value of representation in media, academia, and all other realms. Because it is so rare, we get excited to see some form of representation. Do you think there will ever be a point at which Asian Americans as a collective will move away from the feelings of indebtedness?
I hope so. I really, I really, really hope so. I think it's so internalized though, because it's not just coming from outside, it's coming from our own families. And I don't want to be prescriptive and say it's coming from all families. I would say, as a second generation Korean immigrant whose parents came after 1965, it's something that's very much of my culture. I would say someone who's like, probably actually someone who's more like third or fourth generation would feel less of that, and I think it's also something that it's not just, I've heard other non-white immigrants and maybe even white immigrants say this too, where it's, sorry, I don't have COVID. My daughter had a runny nose. I caught a bit of a cold from her. But even if I did I had COVID, you wouldn't catch it. So the beauty of it. But anyway, what was I saying? Wait, what was I talking about?
Indebtedness and how it's, you don't want to be prescriptive about it because.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to get out of, sorry. It's hard to get out of that because it's not just, let me just use Maya as an example. Thank you. Let me use myself as an example. Not only am I getting it from like the US or where there's a sensibility where I should be grateful, that I should be consulant, that I should be grateful for being an immigrant, for living here instead of like some quote unquote shithole country. But it's also coming from my own family, where, for me, at least, like every week it was drilled into me that I should be very, very lucky for being here in the US, and that my parents are, you know, have suffered so much so that I could be here. I mean, it's a very typical kind of Asian immigrant upbringing, right? And so if you grew up with that and you're getting it both from your home and from your country, it's hard to kind of get outside of that. But I think this is again where finding your community comes in, and finding, and like art and activism and all of that, it really helps in therapy too. Therapy is great in getting yourself out of that very destructive sensibility, because, you know, I wouldn't say it's your parent. I mean, I would even say that with my parents. I mean, I think they were sort of have this sort of colonized consciousness, you know, they are Korean. They America is like Korea is still pretty much occupied by the American military, and that was what they were. That's what they believed, that you know, they saw it from the Hollywood films. Hollywood films is like you know, American propaganda, where they were like, they watched these films and they're like, oh, America's number one, America's the best. They can make and you know, and when they were brought in, they were considered, you know, it would, this mythology didn't come from nowhere, is what I'm saying. It was something that was propagated by the US. It takes a lot of reading and conversation and activism and writing or art making or any of that to work your way out of that. And I think that is a way through it. Reading especially, and friendship. Reading, friendship, activism, and therapy. Those are my 4 prescriptives.
Thank you. And we have more questions. Pam?
Sure. This one, the concept of decentering whiteness, I find fascinating. I hold your book very dearly to me. My question is, how do you think we can penetrate communities that don't interact with Asian Americans at all? How can we change the system from top down?
Oh, that's a great question. First of all, I would say there are many ways to answer that, but I think first, I would say first of all, like, find your community. Numbers is everything. Enter the public in any way you can. And I mean, like, just like step forward into the public. And by public, I mean, you know, that could mean anything. Like, if you're a writer, if you're someone who wants to be a writer, be a writer. If you're someone who wants to volunteer and be part of an activist group, be part of that group. Or if you're someone who wants to be a lawyer, don't go into the private. This is, again, probably more prescriptive. You know, instead of going to a private law firm, go to a public law firm. You know, or go into politics, or go into, like, or just speak, just talk, amplify your voice in any way possible. I think Yuri Kochiyama is an incredible example that Asian Americans have been speaking out for a long time. And it's important to remember that we have a legacy, that this isn't coming from nowhere. But at the same time, we have to persist. We have to continue doing that. And also, it's important to remember that we also have the number, you know, we are the fastest growing minority. And in 2050, we are going to be the non-white, you know, BIPOCs will be the majority. We're going to double. Asian Americans will be maybe 10%, over 10%, 14%, or a little bit less. So the idea of Asian Americans is constantly changing too. And so whatever we do as a collective, I think, will determine who we're going to be. There's a possibility, you know, that some of us may turn white or become white, or we could change what this country is right now. And I think that's why you know, there's this like threat of a civil war because white people, the kind of white people who are in the government, who have power right now, are the minority, and they want to hold on to that power. They want to hoard that power. And this is why I keep asking, what America do you want to belong to? Do you want to belong to an America where we are the majority, or do you want to belong to America where we either fit nowhere, where we either fit in nowhere, or we still try to be part of that sort of minority, you know, that dying minority? And so this is why it is our time, and we need to, and it's absolutely urgent. It is so important that we speak out. And I leave it open-ended what you should speak out about, but you have to speak out. It's just, I don't know. I think it's like our lives depend on it. You know, I think at this point it's like survival mode. You know, people 20 years from now, 40 years from now, people are going to be like, what were you doing in 2020? Someone was making this joke. There's like, they're going to be historians. I saw this on Twitter. They're going to be historians who are really like, yeah, I specialized in the period between October 1st and October 2nd. I mean, just like, it's just like hit every hour, there's some huge fucking crisis. But I think like what's very important is that we're in crisis. We're in crisis, and even it's going to be frustrating because people won't, you know, white people will not hear you and so forth, but that means you just have to struggle harder. And whether it's volunteering for vote, you know, to make sure that there's no voter fraud and that Trump is out of office, or Black Lives Matter, or, you know, enforced, you know, fighting against enforced hysterectomies and detention camps, or the anti-Asian racism. We have to be out there, because they're gonna be people for years from now are gonna be like, what were you doing in 2020? This is a very important year. And I don't know. I'm just, right now, I just feel like I'm trying all I can to fight, just turn back the ship, make sure we don't hit the iceberg, you know. And I think it's possible. I'm not one of those apocalyptic doom and gloom end times kind of person. But it's going to be hard, and it's going to be harder if we don't collectively work together.
Thank you, Cathy, for those words. And thank you just for spending this time with us, talking about your book, your thoughts. I think you're exactly right about how we're in crisis. And I think many of the messages that you talk about in your book about kind of working together, working across communities, talking about our truth, finding belonging, kind of resisting whiteness, but doing more than resisting whiteness. I think trying to really break through and speaking to whiteness as well. I think those are all things that we're going to take with us for a long time, that we'll continue to think about. So we're so grateful, and I'd love to talk with you for another 4 hours, but I know it's not possible. But thank you so much again for spending time with us today. And I don't know if you have any last words that you want to say to the students and to the faculty and staff on the call.
Just vote. All I have to say. Thank you all for your questions and your introductions. I'm very happy to meet you all.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, take care, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll all talk soon, hopefully, and keep reading Cathy's book. If you haven't read it, buy it today. It's amazing. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.